A distorted frequency bleeds through a classified reel-to-reel tape, capturing the trembling whispers of a compromised leader. They didn't break his body, they chemically dismantled his reality until his sins became an inescapable cage. The architecture of absolute control isn't built with iron bars, but with weaponized shame and hallucinogenic nightmares. A sterile room behind a two-way mirror. Federal agents sitting in the dark. They watch, sipping martinis, the ice clinking against the glass in the otherwise silent observation post. On the other side of the glass, a civilian is unknowingly dosed with LSD. He was lured here by a prostitute on the government payroll, a woman trained to seek out men with something to lose. The objective? To see if human behavior can be entirely rewritten. To see if secrets can be extracted through compromised positions and chemical warfare applied to the domestic populace. The CIA wanted the ultimate truth serum and the ultimate weapon of compliance. George Hunter White, a ruthless narcotics officer turned CIA operative, oversees the madness from his perch. This isn't a movie. It is documented, declassified history, unearthed decades later. The Cold War birthed monsters, but they didn't live under the bed, they operated from government-funded safe houses with reel-to-reel recording equipment humming in the background. They used sex as the bait to lower defenses. They used drugs as the mechanism to shatter the ego. And the target? Anyone they deemed useful or expendable. The psychology of blackmail relies on the deepest human vulnerabilities, shame, addiction, and the primal fear of exposure. The victim wakes up the next morning, mind fractured, reputation hanging by a thread, completely unaware of the invisible web now wrapped around his life. They are now an asset, entirely owned by their handlers, susceptible to any command. But how did the agency select their targets with such precision, and what happened when the doses went too far, pushing the human mind past the point of no return? The foundation of this dark architecture of control begins with meticulous psychological profiling. Intelligence agencies didn't just pick random marks off the street, they hunted for specific psychological archetypes, identifying the cracks in the human psyche. The ambitious politician with a hidden, destructive vice. The stressed, high-level corporate executive seeking a dangerous escape from his curated life. The profilers looked for the triad of vulnerability, unchecked personal desires, significant public standing, and a deep-seated, paralyzing fear of losing it all. In the paranoid atmosphere of the 1950s, the MKUltra subproject, famously known as Midnight Climax, became the ultimate testing ground for this exact methodology of human subjugation. They needed subjects who wouldn't dare report the extortion because the act itself was either a severe crime or socially ruinous. The agency safe house at 225 Chestnut Street in San Francisco was meticulously outfitted with hidden microphones and the aforementioned two-way mirrors, turning a brothel into a laboratory. Prostitutes, unwittingly acting as field agents for the U.S. government, were paid handsomely to slip LSD and other hallucinogens into the drinks of their unsuspecting clients. Then, the clinical observation began. The handlers took detailed, sterile notes on the onset of paranoia, the extreme heights of suggestibility, and the eventual terrified compliance of the subjects. But this was merely the crude, chaotic experimental phase. The true, terrifying goal was refining a systematic, repeatable approach to completely breaking a human will. They were constructing a blueprint for weaponized blackmail on a mass scale. If you can control a person's reality through chemical alteration, and simultaneously control their reputation through indisputable photographic and audio evidence, you own their future entirely. But what happens when the subjects start remembering the missing hours, and the horrific static of the drugs finally wears off? The transition from the chaotic, chemically soaked experiments of San Francisco to the systemic, surgical precision of international espionage marked a terrifying evolution. During the height of the Cold War, the Soviet KGB perfected a different kind of psychological warfare, the deployment of swallows and ravens, highly trained intelligence agents weaponized through the art of seduction. It was never truly about the physical act, it was about the cold, calculated documentation of the sin. Entire wings of prominent Moscow establishments, like the notorious Hotel Metropole or the Intourist hotels, were structurally wired for ruin. Hidden cameras were embedded directly into the plaster behind two-way mirrors, capturing the destruction of esteemed careers in grainy, unforgiving black and white. Audio bugs were threaded into the headboards. The target, often a compromised foreign diplomat or a lonely intelligence officer stationed far from home, would eventually realize their entire life's work, their marriage, and their freedom were neatly captured on a spool of 35mm film. The legendary East German spymaster Marcus Wolf famously deployed Romeo spies to seduce lonely secretaries working in West German government offices, gaining access to top-secret NATO documents not through violence, but through weaponized affection. The target was systematically isolated, made to feel entirely dependent on the foreign agent, until the trap was sprung. But who was the first intelligence director to realize the true, devastating power of the honeypot, and exactly how did they perfect the psychological trap to ensure absolute, unquestioning compliance from their victims? To understand how these operations succeed, one must analyze the dark currency of the trade, shame. Blackmail operates almost entirely on the psychological terror of social and professional annihilation. Picture the victim sitting alone in a dimly lit office late at night. The fluorescent tubes overhead flicker with an erratic, low-frequency hum that vibrates directly into the skull, creating a persistent, nauseating drone. The applied drug lowers the initial inhibition, the orchestrated sexual encounter creates the raw compromising material, but the profound, internalized shame is the heavy iron padlock that strictly enforces the absolute silence. Clinical psychologists who study coercion recognize this as a brutal, sophisticated form of forced compliance. The target's identity is violently, irreparably split between their pristine public persona, the respected senator, the moral leader, the brilliant executive, and their sordid, documented private indiscretion caught forever on grainy, high-contrast film. The handler simply threatens to forcibly merge these two disparate worlds, crashing them together like brittle glass. The psychological weight of this impending collision is absolute. The victim is trapped in a state of perpetual, suffocating anxiety. They wake up in the dead of night, a sheen of cold sweat sticking their collar to their neck, staring at the ceiling and knowing that a single phone call or a manila envelope arriving in the morning mail could instantly incinerate their entire existence. The sterile smell of ozone, stale coffee, and raw fear clings to their clothes and skin. They begin to actively rationalize treason. They convince themselves that handing over a classified document or casting a corrupted vote is a necessary evil to protect their families from public disgrace. It is a slow, agonizing erosion of the soul, a rot spreading from the inside out. The handler doesn't even need to shout, the mere existence of the negative film resting in a chilled, climate-controlled subterranean vault does all the heavy lifting. The static electricity in the air around the victim is thick, almost stifling. But as the psychological pressure mounts, a critical question emerges from the suffocating shadows: how much of the target's desperate, trembling compliance is truly driven by the noble desire to protect their loved ones, and how much is fueled by pure, unadulterated, naked ego absolutely terrified of being shattered in the public square. As the geopolitical landscape shifted, so too did the mechanics of the honeypot. It is no longer the exclusive, highly regulated domain of state actors and intelligence agencies operating in the shadows of the Cold War. Today, it has become the ultimate weapon of choice for unregulated private intelligence networks and ultra-wealthy syndicates. These shadow organizations gather massive troves of collateral on the global elite to build unchecked empires of influence. It represents a dramatic, terrifying shift from traditional political espionage to absolute financial and societal control. The sterile, government-funded safehouses of the 1950s, with their ticking reel-to-reel tape recorders and the faint, sterile smell of antiseptic masking the scent of stale liquor, have been replaced by private, sun-drenched islands and sprawling luxury estates, operating completely outside the jurisdiction of international law. Here, the architecture of control is carefully masked by extreme opulence. But beneath the velvet veneer, the underlying mechanics remain identically ruthless. The humming lights of a server farm have replaced the analog bugs, storing petabytes of ruined lives. What makes this modern iteration so horrifying is the realization that the victims aren't just the powerful targets of the blackmail. The true victims are the highly vulnerable individuals, often trafficked, often voiceless, who are ruthlessly utilized as human bait. They are the disposable pawns in a high-stakes game of geopolitical chess. The handlers compile extensive video archives, essentially hoarding the darkest, most depraved secrets of the most powerful figures on Earth. This creates an invisible, impenetrable shield of immunity around the operators. As you listen to the low hum of the audio distortion playing under this revelation, remember, like and subscribe to keep your mind safe from the subtle manipulations working around you. When a private, unaccountable network holds the literal keys to the destruction of politicians, royals, and titans of industry, who truly runs the world? The victim sits in a boardroom, a drop of cold sweat rolling down their spine, realizing the screen in front of them is watching them back, recording every micro-expression of their mounting terror. The sinister application of substance abuse in these operations extends far beyond the initial, chaotic compromise. The most ruthless handlers utilize chemical dependence not just as a temporary wedge, but as a permanent, unbreakable leash. In these advanced scenarios, the handler becomes the sole provider of the illicit supply, while the broken target provides the steady stream of classified intelligence or necessary legislative compliance. The psychology of a chemically dependent asset is uniquely fragile, desperate, and highly malleable. They are entirely stripped of their autonomy. Picture the target alone in a sterile hotel room, the humming lights buzzing with a frequency that seems to scrape against their exposed nerves. The air conditioning unit rattles, blowing a harsh, metallic chill into the room, raising a layer of cold sweat on their trembling skin. They will willingly betray their country, their deeply held principles, and their own families to avoid the dual, compounding horrors of physical withdrawal and imminent public exposure. They are trapped in a claustrophobic, self-reinforcing loop of absolute degradation, surrounded by the sterile smell of bleached sheets and lingering nausea. The handler manipulates the dosage, coldly withholding the substance to induce panic, muscle spasms, and wide-eyed desperation, then providing it as a reward for high-value treason. It is operant conditioning reduced to its most horrific, biological extreme. The target's entire existence is narrowed down to the next fix and the terrifying avoidance of the impending exposure. It is a slow-motion execution of the target's free will, broadcast internally on an endless, looping tape of their own guilt. But the human mind and body are finite resources, fragile vessels cracking under impossible pressure. As the chemical toxicity builds up in their veins and the psychological dissonance reaches a boiling point, how long can a handler realistically maintain control before the asset's mind completely collapses into paranoid psychosis under the immense, crushing strain? Perhaps the most deeply unsettling aspect of this dark science is the deliberate interrogation and manipulation of memory itself. Intelligence programs specifically researched and tested chemical compounds designed to induce profound, temporary amnesia during the compromising acts. Drugs heavily impacting the central nervous system were utilized to create dark, unrecoverable voids in the target's timeline. The psychological devastation of this technique is unparalleled. Imagine waking up in an unfamiliar room, your clothes clinging to you with a thick layer of cold sweat, the harsh, unforgiving glare of overhead humming lights burning directly into your retinas. The walls are bare concrete, amplifying the maddening, low-frequency buzz of the electrical wiring hidden just out of sight. You have absolutely no memory of the preceding night, only a lingering, terrifyingly sterile smell of medical-grade alcohol, burnt ozone, and cheap perfume that you cannot place. Then, you are calmly confronted by a faceless handler sliding a thick manila folder of indisputable, high-resolution photographs across a cold metal table. If the target cannot consciously remember committing the horrifying act, but is staring at irrefutable visual evidence of their own physical participation, the psychological break is severe, violent, and immediate. The sheer cognitive dissonance of seeing oneself cross unthinkable moral boundaries completely shatters the fundamental sense of self. The target's reality is completely unmoored, left drifting in a sea of static. In this state of artificially induced psychological freefall, the handler effectively becomes the target's only remaining tether to reality. The handler dictates what happened, what it means, and exactly what the target must do to survive it. The target's mind is violently scrubbed, reduced to a sterile, echoing room filled with relentless white noise and overwhelming, suffocating dread. In the darkest corners of these behavioral laboratories, surrounded by the low thrum of recording equipment, one chilling question remains: can a person be permanently convinced they are guilty of horrific crimes they have absolutely no genuine memory of committing? Yet, for all its sinister perfection, the system is not infallible. There is always the looming, terrifying specter of inevitable blowback. What exactly happens when the meticulously engineered blackmail completely fails to break the target? Throughout history, there have been rare, deeply resilient individuals who simply refuse to bend to the extortion. This is the history of defiant whistleblowers and stubborn figures who actively chose utter social, financial, and professional ruin over covert, lifetime compliance. It requires an immense, almost incomprehensible level of psychological fortitude to willingly face public destruction just to spite a hidden handler. When a target rejects the terms, the physical atmosphere in the room shifts. The handler, used to the terrified compliance and the cold sweat of their victims, is suddenly faced with a jarring unpredictability. The humming lights seem to flicker in time with the escalating tension. The sterile smell of the interrogation room suddenly feels suffocating to the interrogator themselves. The agency's darkest nightmare was realized during the sweeping, historic investigations of the Church Committee in 1975, which violently dragged the atrocities of Mkultra out of the shadows and into the blinding, unforgiving light of public scrutiny. The panic within the intelligence community was absolute and visceral. CIA Director Richard Helms, realizing the walls were rapidly closing in, ordered the frantic, wholesale destruction of thousands of Mkultra documents in 1973. He sought to permanently erase the evidence of the safe houses, the unwitting dosings, and the ruined lives left in their wake. But as the industrial shredders hummed late into the night, vibrating through the floors of Langley, a darker, more unsettling implication emerged from the dust. Did Helms desperately destroy those files merely to protect the historic legacy of the agency, or did he burn them to hide the evidence of their most highly successful, ongoing operations that were still actively controlling the nation's leaders? The dawn of the digital age did not eliminate the psychology of blackmail, it merely industrialized it, creating a terrifying new paradigm of remote, algorithmic extortion. Today, the initial compromise no longer requires physical safehouses, neon-lit streets, or government-funded prostitutes. It relies on automated catfishing, zero-click spyware like Pegasus, and thoroughly compromised digital devices that capture our darkest moments in high definition. The deep psychological profiling is no longer painstakingly done by men smoking in dark rooms. It is executed by silent, invisible algorithms that continuously analyze search histories, private encrypted messages, and vast digital footprints to identify critical, hidden vulnerabilities before the digital trap is even set. The blackmail material is gathered completely remotely, the intrusion is entirely invisible to the target. A CEO, a politician, or a judge can be utterly compromised without ever leaving the perceived safety of their own home. Imagine sitting in your study late at night, the only illumination coming from the harsh, blue glare of your monitor. The humming lights of the computer's cooling fan mask the absolute silence of the room. Suddenly, a file arrives. You open it, and a cold sweat breaks out across your forehead as you stare at a hyper-realistic, AI-generated reconstruction of your deepest secrets, or worse, genuine stolen footage. The camera on your laptop, the microphone on your phone, these are the new, terrifying two-way mirrors, recording your mounting panic. The sterile smell of heated electronics fills your nostrils. The constant, looming, agonizing fear is reduced to the threat of a single automated send button, capable of instantly distributing the devastating collateral to every contact, family member, and press outlet simultaneously. The architecture of ruin is now perfectly streamlined, decentralized, and devastatingly efficient. As we blindly feed our deepest secrets into the glass screens resting in our hands, a chilling realization takes hold. Are we all simply one compromised password or one automated data breach away from total, unrecoverable ruin? The ultimate, horrifying realization of this dark journey is the scale of the control achieved. The deeply unsettling conclusion is that the massive, complex systems of global power and influence are largely built upon a hidden, rotting foundation of leveraged secrets and engineered extortion. The psychology of blackmail isn't just a niche, historical intelligence tool used during the paranoia of the Cold War, it is the invisible, load-bearing structural architecture of elite global control. The true history of the modern world has not been shaped entirely by public treaties, democratic elections, or open diplomacy. It has been silently, forcefully shaped by the darkest secrets carefully kept in subterranean government vaults and heavily encrypted digital lockboxes. The policies that govern our lives are often drafted by hands that are trembling with the fear of exposure, slick with a cold sweat that never truly dries. The chilling truth is that the powerful individuals supposedly making the rules, the ones commanding the armies and the economies, are very often the ones most hopelessly and thoroughly compromised by the invisible handlers lurking in the shadows. The illusion of autonomy is the greatest trick ever played on the global populace. Picture the observation room one last time. The humming lights flicker off, plunging the space into absolute darkness. The sterile smell of the laboratory lingers in the dead air, a permanent reminder of the psychological warfare waged within its walls. The static on the surveillance tape slowly fades out into a deafening silence. The sterile room behind the two-way mirror remains dark, cold, and utterly empty. The operation is officially over, but the control is absolute and everlasting. The invisible chains have already been forged and locked securely into place. As you lock your doors tonight and stare into the black, reflective glass of your modern devices, ask yourself, who is watching you right now from behind the mirror?